Hello and welcome to this tutorial video. I'm going to be running through a few composition workflows using my Maximal Rhythm application in tandem with an Ableton Live session. If you want to know how to configure the Ableton Live and Maximal Rhythm applications to work together, see the previous tutorial, which is solely about the Maximal Rhythm application. I'm also going to be using some audio created using my other Max application, the Drone Machine. You can find both of the Max applications via www.jackissound.com and on my Bandcamp website. So let's dive in and have a quick look at the Ableton Live session. I have one track in it, simply called My Drum Rack, on which is a drum rack. And here are the sounds that I've imported into the drum rack. I have a kick, a closed hi-hat, a snare, another snare, and some stick click sounds. I also have some additional sounds which I've called a ting and a cymbal. We're going to be triggering these 5 pads using Maximal Rhythm. So as you can see, Maximal Rhythm has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main modules. So let's get started. One additional thing I do need to mention before we begin is the importance of setting the release parameter on all of your samples to maximum. Now this is because the MIDI data which comes from Maximal Rhythm actually triggers just a short MIDI note because of the way that it works. To counteract that, we need to make sure that the release on all of your samples is set to maximum. So if we just follow this kick sample through the various instrument racks, and look at this chain which is called crush and drum crush left, notice that the release value is on the maximum, which is 60 seconds. And you need to make sure that all of the samples that you're using to be triggered by Maximal Rhythm have the release value on the maximum value. The first thing I'd like to do is record some MIDI data into Ableton Live with just a simple 4/4 kick drum. So I'm going to set Maximal Rhythm off and running just by selecting the Maximal Rhythm window and pressing play. The cross goes green. I'm going to activate the C3 module. And when it's activated, you can hear the kick drum. So I'm going to switch it back on. Just stop it there. And then I'm going to record that MIDI data into an empty MIDI clip slot. Okay, that'll do us for now. Now, as you can see, we've got the MIDI data recorded into the clip slot here, and I'm quickly just going to configure this clip so that this first MIDI click here, or kick, sorry, is set to be the downbeat of the first bar. Then I'm going to make a selection. Oops. Make that selection, and using Command and L, make that a 4/4 loop. Now I haven't had to do any quantization there because, as you can see, the Ableton Live session is at 120 BPM and Maximal Rhythm is currently set to 120 BPM as well. If you had differing tempos between the two applications, you would have to do some quantization. We'll look at that a little bit later. So at the minute then, what we've got is a 4/4 kick drum. I'm just going to select all of the MIDI notes and just make them a little bit longer so they're easier to work with. And I'm going to select this kick beat and just make the velocity a little bit less. Okay, so there's our first 4/4 kick loop. Now I'm going to select this MIDI clip and just rename it 4/4. And now I'm going to start to work through the other modules and start to add some other sounds. Okay, so let's add some hi-hat to the mix now then. I have my hi-hat sample imported onto the C# pad here on the drum rack. So we're going to use this C#3 module to make some hi-hat sounds and record them into this MIDI clip here. I'm going to deactivate the C3 module so we can't hear the kick anymore, other than the kick which is coming from it directly from Ableton Live, and I'm going to activate the C#3 module. Now then, I've got C#3 set to random velocity at the minute, with the lowest part of the range at 20 and the highest at 127. So I'm just going to stop the clip in Ableton Live and launch Maximal Rhythm. Okay, so the hi-hat is currently playing in relative time and in eighth notes with a random velocity between 20 and 127. And I want to record that into this MIDI clip using the overdub button here. And you'll notice when I press this overdub button, it does two things. It launches the clip. It also puts the clip into overdub mode. That's why this green play marker goes red. So I'm going to launch that once more, and then I'm going to launch Maximal Rhythm, and you'll see the hi-hat MIDI data being recorded into the clip. Okay, now that I've stopped both Ableton Live and Maximal Rhythm, I'm going to do a few things with this MIDI data that we just recorded in. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of it, and you can do that just by clicking on the piano note, which corresponds to the sound that you want to use. And then I'm going to use the arrows on my keyboard all the way back, so they're now in line with the grid the way we want it to be. So let's just launch the clip and see what it sounds like. So as you can see, it's very quick and easy to start to get something together using Maximal Rhythm. So the workflow I've showed you so far has been with a fairly simple 4/4 beat and then adding some simple eighth note hi-hats. I'm sure you can see how it would be very easy to progress through the D3, D#3 and E3 modules as well to add 3 other sounds. But Maximal Rhythm is really designed for more interesting non-standard time signature work, and that's what we're going to look at next. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that the bar fixed velocity setting is switched on, and I'm going to raise this bar fixed velocity value up to almost full, 120. I also want to activate the random control, which means that the numerator will change to a random value every bar. That random value will be chosen from a value between the minimum and maximum range. I'm going to raise the maximum range up to 11. So the time signature will basically be between 2/4 and 11/4, and it'll change with every bar. So I'm going to set this MIDI clip to record, and then I'm going to launch Maximal Rhythm and just watch and listen to what happens for a minute or so. Okay, so we've got quite a lot of MIDI data recorded there, so let's have a look at how we can actually work with it. As you know, the time signature was changing with every bar when we were recording there. So the workflow is going to involve working through the bars, one at a time, and saving each bar as its own MIDI clip. So let's just zoom in a little bit and start to unpack the MIDI data that we've got. You can see that this first kick has a velocity of 120, which was our bar fixed velocity value. So we know that every time we see a kick which has 120 velocity, here, here, and here, that's the first note of the bar. All we need to do then is count how many kicks there are in between these 120 velocity value notes. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we can say that that's a bar of 9/4. So the first thing I'm going to do with this MIDI clip is duplicate it just by selecting it and pressing Command D. I'm going to call this top clip 9/4 by pressing Command and R. Just typing in 9/4 and hitting enter. I'm then going to make a selection of those first 9 notes, being careful to select only those 9 notes, and then press Command and L, which moves the loop brace to that position where the selection is made. I'm then going to right click on this first MIDI note and press set 1.1.1 here, which tells Ableton Live that this is the downbeat of the bar. I'm then going to change the time signature of the MIDI clip, which is down here in the lower left, to 9/4. Now if I correctly position the loop brace and hit play, you can see that we've got a bar of 9/4. It's fairly simple to see how we could work through all of these bars and create individual MIDI clips which has their own time signature. So let's just look at the next one. If we move down, we know that we've already used the first 9 notes, so we can select those and delete them. Now let's count how many notes there are between these 2 kicks which have 120 velocity value. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So here's a bar of 7/4. So let's make that selection again. Move the loop brace. Set 1.1.1 here to be the first kick. Position the loop brace correctly. I've forgotten a step here, haven't I? I need to change this time signature to be 7/4. Now we position the loop brace correctly and hit play on the correct clip. And there's a bar of 7/4. Before we rename it, let's just quickly duplicate the clip so we can work on the next one, and then rename this 7/4. Okay, so now we have our 9/4 clip and our 7/4 clip, and I'm sure you can see how you could work through the rest of the MIDI data to create all of your different clips for different time signatures to form the basis of a composition. So I've skipped ahead a little bit here. I've created a 9/4 clip, 7/4 clip, 5/4, 2/4, 3/4 and 10/4. And now I'm going to use a Maximal Rhythm, the C#3 module, in absolute time mode to trigger a hi-hat sound every 0.6 seconds. So let's just launch Maximal Rhythm, and then I'm going to put live into overdub mode to record that hi-hat data into this 9/4 clip. Okay, so there's the MIDI data in the clip. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so I can work with it a little bit more. Okay, and then I'm going to move the notes back to the beginning of the bar, so it sounds like this. Okay, and I'm going to add that hi-hat beat to all of the other clips just by selecting it and copying and pasting to the other clips, like so. Okay, so that hi-hat beat will now run through all of the clips. I've now used a Maximal Rhythm to create a combination of rhythms with the D3, D#3 and E3 modules. D3 is in absolute time. D#3 is also in absolute time but slightly slower. And E3 is in relative time. And all 3 modules are transmitting random velocities between the various ranges. I want to record that combination into this 10/4 clip. So I'm going to do a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to switch loop mode off in this clip, and hopefully that it'll make sense why I've done that in a second. I'm then going to launch Maximal Rhythm. I also need to activate the modules. Okay, and then I'll launch Maximal Rhythm, and then I'll put Ableton Live into overdub mode, and you'll see the MIDI data fill up here. Okay, so I waited for the MIDI data to pass the start of bar 2, so we've got one whole bar. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to deselect all of the notes and then select all of the click 2 notes and just stretch them out a little bit so they're a little easier to work with. Now I was quite lucky there because they snap to the start of the bar, but if they don't snap to the start of the bar, because remember we had click 2 in relative mode, so we know that those eighth notes are going to be spot on with the bar. We're in 120 BPM in Maximal Rhythm and 120 BPM at live, so we know that they're going to sync up. Incidentally, if you had a different tempo in Maximal Rhythm and you recorded into a tempo of 120, you could just use the quantize functions in Ableton Live to sync them up with the grid. But now that we know that we've got those synced with the grid, we can then turn loop back on and listen to what we've got. Okay, so something pretty interesting. Now I want to copy and paste all of that data into the other clips like we did before. So just select it all and then copy and paste in. So I've jumped ahead a little bit again here. I've copied and pasted all of that data into the various MIDI clips so you don't have to watch me doing it. And I've also used the Ableton Live follow action function to set each clip to randomly play one other clip on this track after it's finished playing. So you just need to make sure that the follow action settings are as follows on each clip. So at the end of one playthrough, it plays one other clip and the weighting is set to always do this function on that left hand side. Just have a quick listen to what that sounds like. You'll hear that each clip will play through in its entirety one time regardless of the time signature, and then it'll jump onto another clip. I tell you what, while we're listening to that, why don't we record it over into arrangement view, and then we can start to put together the basis of a composition. Okay, so that sounds rather interesting. We've got all of our different time signature clips in arrangement view, and if you're comfortable with Ableton Live or whichever sequencer you're using, obviously you can extend any of these clips that you want. You can move these clips around, set them to play for 3 or 4 loops, 3 or 4 times round, whatever you want to do. That's completely up to you. But once you've got this raw data and all these different time signatures, there's an awful lot that you can do with it. I've created an arrangement here by copying and pasting the MIDI clips to various positions on the timeline. I also went through and changed the time signature of the arrangement every time the time signature of the clips change. Let's just have a quick listen. So you'll see the time signature changing up here as it moves between the time signatures of the clips. Now the reason the time signature changes aren't reflected up here across the top of the timeline are because I froze the track and it removed them. So if I go over to session view, I'm going to bring in the audio file that we created in an earlier tutorial with the drone machine Max application. If you haven't seen that tutorial, it's on my YouTube channel. So I'm just going to drag that in. It will create an audio track, right click and slice to new MIDI track. I'm going to use my own preset here. Ableton Live creates a new MIDI track with a sampler on and puts all of the new slices into that sampler. Sorry, this is a drum rack on which each pad is a sampler containing all of the samples. Okay, finally what I want to do is copy all of this drum MIDI information down to the new MIDI track, which means that the samples that we just created by slicing to MIDI are going to be triggered by the same MIDI data as the drums. I'm just going to solo the track. Let's have a listen. Hopefully in that you should be able to hear the similar rhythms. One final thing I'm going to do, if I just select one of the samples down here and increase the attack time up to around about 50 milliseconds, then right click and copy the value to siblings. That's going to change the attack time of all of these samples to 50 milliseconds just to get rid of those pops. Okay, now let's have a listen with the drums. Okay, and like that we can have the samples triggered in the same timing and the same rhythms as the drums. Okay, so we've ran through quite a lot in that tutorial. Obviously there's a lot more to dig into with various sampler settings, but that's for a different day. Thank you for watching.